When my husband passed away, my daughter-in-law looked at me and said, "Pack your bags and don't come back. You're not welcome here anymore." Those words struck me harder than anything I could have ever imagined. My name is Nancy Allen, and I'm 64 years old. After living a life of dedication to my family, the last thing I expected was to be thrown out like an unwanted guest. My world shattered in that moment, but I didn't react the way she thought I would. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I simply picked up my things and left, because sometimes the best response is silence. Losing my husband was already the hardest thing I'd ever gone through, but now this? I didn't even know how to process it. I thought I had raised my children with love and care, that they would honor the family bond we shared. But in a single moment, it became clear that all of that was nothing more than a fragile illusion. As I stepped out of the house that had been my home for over 30 years, I couldn't help but feel the weight of betrayal bearing down on me. The house was silent, empty without the presence of my husband. His chair at the dinner table sat still, and the familiar hum of our daily life was gone. I had to leave, but it didn't make sense. How had it all gone so wrong? I didn't know where to go, but I wasn't going to show her my pain. I wasn't going to let her see the cracks she had created. So I walked away. The cold air outside didn't feel as bitter as the sting of her words, but it was a reminder that my life had changed forever. As I found a place to stay that night, the reality of my situation began to set in. I was alone, completely alone, and in that solitude I had to figure out what came next. The days following that night were harder than I could have imagined. The silence that surrounded me felt deafening, and every corner of my small apartment felt foreign. I had lived in that house for so long, filled with memories of my late husband, that even the simple act of waking up in a different place left me feeling lost. I spent the first 2 days in a fog, barely able to make decisions. I didn't want to be a burden, but I also didn't know how to move forward. I kept replaying the moments before I left, wondering if I had done something wrong. Had I been a bad mother? A bad mother-in-law? My daughter-in-law's words kept echoing in my mind, and for the first time in years I questioned everything. It wasn't just her words that hurt me. It was the betrayal. I had given everything to this family, and yet here I was alone. The house that I had once loved, where we had raised our children and built a life together, now stood as a symbol of everything I had lost. The pain of my husband's death was fresh, but the coldness of my daughter-in-law's actions added a new layer of heartache. I couldn't understand how someone I had trusted so much could turn so easily against me. On the third day, I heard a knock on my door. I wasn't expecting anyone, but when I opened it, there she was, my daughter-in-law, standing on my doorstep, tears streaming down her face. For a moment I was frozen. What was she doing here? The same woman who had told me to leave just days before was now crying in front of me? I stood there staring at her, my emotions tangled. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to slam the door in her face, to remind her of what she had done. But another part of me, the part that had always tried to keep the peace, felt pity for her. She looked different now, fragile almost. The woman who had kicked me out just days before seemed like a completely different person. But I couldn't let my guard down that easily. The pain was still too fresh, and I had learned the hard way that trust wasn't something to be given away so freely. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I didn't mean it. I was overwhelmed." I wanted to say something to let her know how much her words had hurt, but all I could do was stand there staring at her. How could she expect me to forgive her so easily? It was the 5th day since I had been forced out of my home, and I was still struggling to find my place. The apartment, though small and bare, began to feel more like a sanctuary than a prison. The silence wasn't as loud anymore, but the weight of my daughter-in-law's betrayal still hung heavy in the air. I kept thinking about that moment when she had told me to leave, her words sharp and cold. She hadn't even given me a chance to explain. It was as if I had no value anymore. I spent hours sitting by the window, staring at the world outside, wondering how everything had unraveled so quickly. My husband had always been my anchor, and now that he was gone, I was left drifting in an ocean of uncertainty. I tried not to dwell on the past, but it was hard. Our home, the one where we had built a life together, was now just a distant memory. I could still hear his voice, his laughter echoing through the halls. I missed him more than words could express. Yet, at the same time, there was a part of me that was angry. Angry at my daughter-in-law for treating me like an inconvenience. Angry at myself for not seeing it sooner. It was only now, in the quiet of my solitude, that I began to realize just how much I had been blinded by my love for my family. I had given them everything, my time, my energy, my heart, and yet they had cast me aside without a second thought. It was on the 6th day that I finally decided to call her. I had no idea what I was going to say, but something inside me urged me to make the first move. I dialed her number, my heart pounding in my chest. When she answered, there was a hesitation in her voice. "Nancy," she said, as if she hadn't expected to hear from me. I took a deep breath before speaking. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady, though I could feel the sting of the past few days in my words. She didn't say anything at first, and for a moment I thought she might hang up. But then she spoke again, her voice softer now. "I know I hurt you. I'm so sorry." The apology felt empty, but I didn't know what else to say. I had waited for this moment, waited for her to admit that she was wrong. But now that it was here, I wasn't sure if I could forgive her. Still, I told myself I would try. I had to. For the sake of my own peace. "I don't know what happened," she continued. "I was just overwhelmed and I didn't know how to deal with it." Her words seemed rehearsed, as if she had practiced them 1,000 times. I didn't believe her, not fully, but I needed to hear it. I needed to hear that she felt remorse for what she had done. But the more she spoke, the more I realized that maybe the apology wasn't enough. Maybe it was too late. The days that followed were filled with an unsettling stillness. I tried to fill the emptiness with simple tasks, cleaning, cooking, and organizing things I hadn't touched in years. But every task felt like a distraction from the pain I was carrying. There were moments when I thought about going back, about forgiving her, about letting it all go. But then I remembered the look in her eyes when she told me to leave, the coldness in her voice. Forgiveness was something I could offer once I saw genuine remorse, but it was clear that she wasn't there yet. It was hard to accept that the woman I had considered family could turn on me so easily. I kept wondering if I had missed something all those years. If there had been signs that I ignored, moments that were meant to warn me. Maybe I had been too busy with my own life, too focused on keeping the peace to see what was really happening. It was during these long hours of reflection that I began to think about my own role in this situation. Had I been too accommodating, too eager to please? Had I allowed myself to be taken advantage of without even realizing it? As the days went on, I realized something important. I had to stop allowing myself to be treated this way. I couldn't let her continue to control the narrative, to play the victim when she was the one who had wronged me. But it wasn't just her. It was everyone who had turned their backs on me when I needed them the most. I had always been the one to hold the family together, to make sure everyone was okay. But in the end, I was the one left alone, cast aside like I didn't matter. As I sat in the quiet of my apartment, I made a decision. I wouldn't let them have the power over me anymore. I wouldn't let her have the satisfaction of seeing me weak. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to be her doormat anymore. I would find my own path, my own strength. And if she wanted forgiveness, she would have to earn it. I wasn't going to hand it to her just because she thought she deserved it. My life had value, and I wouldn't let her or anyone else make me feel small again. The following days felt like a strange balance between strength and vulnerability. I tried to focus on finding a sense of routine, doing things that brought me comfort, like tending to my small garden, or reading the books that had been sitting on my shelf for years. But every now and then, I would catch myself thinking about what had happened, replaying that moment when my daughter-in-law had told me to leave. It gnawed at me, that feeling of being cast aside by someone I had trusted so completely. I wasn't sure how long it would take for me to move on from that. But in the meantime, I focused on what I could control myself. I began to realize how much strength I had within me, strength I didn't know existed. It wasn't just about surviving the past few days. It was about regaining control of my life, of my emotions, and my future. I had spent so many years living for others, trying to make everyone happy, trying to keep the peace. And now I was learning how to put myself first. I wasn't going to let this situation define me, and I certainly wasn't going to let her actions dictate how I saw myself. As I continued to heal, I started reaching out to people who cared about me, friends I hadn't seen in a while. They were supportive, kind, and didn't make me feel like a burden. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I mattered. I didn't need my daughter-in-law's approval or validation to feel like I had value. I began to rediscover pieces of myself I had lost over the years. It wasn't easy. There were moments when I wanted to call her, to hear her voice and maybe even forgive her. But I resisted. I reminded myself that forgiveness wasn't something to be rushed, especially when it came to someone who had hurt me so deeply. I realized that forgiveness wasn't about letting her off the hook. It was about releasing the hold that anger and pain had over me. I wasn't going to carry that burden any longer. Slowly, I began to feel lighter, as if a weight I hadn't even realized was finally lifting. I was moving forward and I wasn't going to look back. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in weeks, I felt like I was ready to face it. As the weeks went by, I began to realize just how much I had underestimated myself. I had spent so much of my life giving to others, putting their needs above my own, that I had lost touch with who I really was. But now, as I stood on my own 2 feet, I could see things more clearly. I could feel the change within me, like a light that had been hidden for so long was finally shining through. I started doing things for myself. Small things like taking long walks in the park, drinking my morning coffee in peace, and rediscovering the hobbies I had long abandoned. For the first time in years, I felt like I was living for me, and it was liberating. I had learned to let go of the anger and pain that had consumed me for so long. It wasn't that I had forgotten what had happened or that I was excusing my daughter-in-law's actions. But I knew that holding on to that bitterness wasn't helping me heal. I wasn't going to let her or anyone else control my emotions anymore. It was in this space of personal growth that I finally began to feel at peace. I had found my own strength, my own sense of self-worth. And it wasn't dependent on anyone else's approval. I didn't need her to validate me anymore. As I continued to heal, I started thinking more about my future. What did I want from the rest of my life? The thought of spending my days in sadness and regret didn't appeal to me. I wanted to live with purpose, to find joy again, even if it meant doing it on my own. It wasn't easy to let go of the family I had always known, but I was learning to embrace the freedom that came with it. I realized that my worth wasn't tied to the love or approval of others, and that was a powerful realization. There were still moments when I missed my old life, when I wished things could go back to the way they were. But those moments were becoming fewer and farther between. I was starting to see the world through new eyes. Eyes that no longer saw myself as a victim but as a survivor. The road ahead wasn't clear, but I felt ready to take it. I knew that no matter what happened, I had the strength to face it. And that was enough. It was a Saturday afternoon when I received the call. I had been sitting on my porch, enjoying the sunshine and a cup of tea, when my phone buzzed. I didn't recognize the number, but something told me it was time. I had been avoiding her for weeks, but now she was reaching out again. It was my daughter-in-law. Her voice was tentative when she spoke, almost unsure of what she was going to say. "Nancy, I need to talk to you," she said, her words heavy with emotion. I could hear the hesitation in her voice, the uncertainty. It was the first time she had called me since everything happened, and I wasn't sure what to expect. "I know I've hurt you," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "And I know I can't take back what I did, but I want to make things right." I took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing heart. It had been so long since I'd heard her speak like this, since I'd heard anything that resembled an apology. I didn't know if I was ready to forgive her, but I wasn't going to shut her out completely either. "What do you want from me?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. "I want to try," she said, her voice trembling. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want to be a part of your life again. I've been thinking a lot, and I regret everything." I felt the weight of her words sink in, but I couldn't let my guard down too quickly. It had been a long time since I had trusted her, and I wasn't sure if I could ever fully trust her again. But there was something in her voice that made me pause. Maybe it was genuine remorse. Maybe it wasn't. "I don't know if I can forgive you right now," I said, my voice steady but firm. "But I'm willing to listen." I hung up the phone and sat there for a moment, letting the silence wash over me. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let the past define me. I had learned how to stand on my own, and I wasn't going to let anyone, not even family, take that away from me. Whether or not I chose to forgive her was up to me, and I wasn't going to make any decisions until I was ready. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had control over my life again. The days that followed the phone call were filled with a strange sense of anticipation. I didn't know what would come of my daughter-in-law's apology, but I knew I had to be cautious. The last time I had trusted her, I ended up being thrown out of my home. She couldn't just expect me to forgive her overnight, not after everything she had done. I spent the next few days reflecting on our relationship, on everything that had led to this moment. It wasn't just her betrayal that hurt. It was the realization that I had allowed myself to be treated this way for so long. I had been too forgiving, too willing to overlook the small signs of disrespect. I had spent so many years trying to keep the peace, trying to make everyone happy, that I had lost sight of my own happiness. But now I was different. I wasn't the same person who had walked out of that house months ago. I had learned to stand up for myself, to set boundaries and protect my peace. I wasn't sure if I would ever trust her again, but I knew that I had the power to choose how much of my life she would be a part of. One evening, after thinking it over, I decided to meet her. I wasn't ready to let her back into my life completely, but I could give her the chance to prove that she had changed. We met at a small cafe, a neutral place where I could keep my distance if I needed to. When I saw her, she looked different. The confident, cold woman who had once told me to leave was now sitting before me, her eyes red from crying, her hands trembling as she nervously fidgeted with her cup. "Thank you for meeting me," she said softly, her voice quieter than I remembered. "I've had a lot of time to think, and I know I've hurt you. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want to make things right." I didn't say anything at first. I just watched her, feeling the weight of the years of hurt between us. Finally I spoke, my voice steady but firm. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you for what you did," I said. "But I'm willing to listen." The words felt heavy as they left my mouth. They were honest and they were true. I didn't know what would come of this conversation, but for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was in control of my own story. I wasn't going to let her or anyone else dictate my emotions. I was ready to move forward, but only on my terms. We sat in silence for a long moment. I could feel the weight of everything that had happened, the hurt, the betrayal, hanging in the air between us. I knew that this conversation wasn't going to fix everything, but it was a start. She seemed different now, calmer, more vulnerable, and for a second I almost let my guard down. But then I remembered why I had to be strong. I had to protect myself. I wasn't going to let the past repeat itself. "I don't know if I can ever fully forgive you," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "What you did hurt me in ways I can't explain. You took something from me, something I can never get back." She nodded, her face crumpling with regret. "I know," she whispered, "and I don't expect you to forgive me right away. I just want you to know that I'm sorry. I didn't realize what I was doing until it was too late. I took you for granted, and I should have known better. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make up for it, if you'll let me." I looked at her, really looked at her for the first time in a long while. I saw the sincerity in her eyes, the genuine remorse. But I also saw something else, something I hadn't seen before: vulnerability. She wasn't the same person who had told me to leave, who had dismissed me without a second thought. Maybe she had changed. Maybe she hadn't. I wasn't sure yet. "I can't promise you anything," I said, finally breaking the silence. "But I'm willing to try. I don't know what that looks like yet, but I'm not closing the door completely." Her eyes widened, and for a moment she looked almost relieved. "Thank you," she said softly. "I know it's not much, but it means everything to me." I nodded, unsure of where this would lead. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was taking control of my own life again. I wasn't waiting for anyone's approval. I wasn't living to please others. And that was a feeling I hadn't had in a long time. I didn't know if I would ever fully trust her again, but I knew one thing for sure. I was going to take things one step at a time on my own terms. As the weeks passed, I found myself caught in a delicate balance between holding on to the past and stepping forward into the unknown. My daughter-in-law's apology still lingered in my thoughts, but I didn't let it consume me. I knew I couldn't simply pick up where we left off, but I also realized that I wasn't the same person who had left that house months ago. I had changed. I had learned that I had the power to choose how I wanted to live my life, regardless of how others treated me. Each day I took small steps to rebuild what had been lost: my confidence, my sense of self, and most importantly, my peace. There were days when the weight of everything still felt heavy, when memories of my late husband would wash over me, and the grief would settle in like an old friend. But I no longer let it define me. I allowed myself to feel the sadness, but I didn't let it control my every thought. Slowly, I started reconnecting with old friends, those who had been there for me before everything fell apart. Their support reminded me that I was not alone, that I had people in my corner who loved me, despite what had happened. I took comfort in those relationships, knowing that true love and care weren't dependent on shared bloodlines. One afternoon, my daughter-in-law called again. This time, I didn't hesitate to answer. We talked, and while it wasn't an easy conversation, it was real. She expressed her regret again, but this time there was no expectation. She wasn't trying to erase what had happened, just acknowledging that she had hurt me. "I understand if you can't ever forgive me," she said, her voice steady but vulnerable. "But I want you to know that I am truly sorry." I didn't have an answer for her right away. I wasn't ready to make any promises. But I told her that I was willing to try, that I wasn't ready to close the door completely. The conversation ended on a note of mutual understanding, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had taken another step forward. I didn't know what the future held for our relationship, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let the past define me anymore. I had spent too long living in the shadows of others' actions. It was time to live for me. Over the following weeks, things began to settle into a new routine. The heaviness in my chest slowly began to lift, but it wasn't gone entirely. It was like a shadow that hung over me, reminding me of the betrayal. Yet I refused to let it control my life any longer. I realized that the strength I had been searching for had always been inside me. I had to stop waiting for others to give me permission to live my life. It was mine to shape, mine to live. The calls from my daughter-in-law became more frequent. Each time I felt a small shift, a gentle reopening of the door I had closed. I didn't rush into anything, but I allowed myself to consider the possibility that people could change. We talked sometimes for hours, and each conversation felt like a small step forward. She didn't expect immediate forgiveness, and I didn't offer it, but there was progress. I could hear the sincerity in her voice, and I started to believe that she truly wanted to make amends, though the scars of the past couldn't be erased overnight. One day she asked if we could meet in person. It felt like a big step, and I wasn't sure if I was ready. But then I remembered how much I had changed, how far I had come since that first cold, hurtful night. I agreed, but on my terms. I didn't need to forgive her right away, and I didn't need to make any promises. But I could listen, and I could decide if I was ready to take the next step. We met at a park, a place I felt comfortable, where the noise of the world could be drowned out by the sounds of nature. When she arrived, I saw a woman who had aged in a way that I hadn't expected. Her eyes were tired, but there was a softness there too, something that made me pause. "Nancy, I know I've hurt you in ways I can't fix," she said quietly, her voice shaky. "But I want you to know I'm trying. I want to make things right." Her words hung in the air between us. I didn't speak right away. I simply nodded, taking a deep breath. I didn't know what I expected from this conversation, but I realized that I was no longer the woman who would swallow her feelings to keep the peace. "I'm willing to hear you," I said finally. "But I'm not going to pretend like everything is okay." She nodded, understanding. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control. I wasn't just a passive player in my own life. I had the power to decide how this story would unfold. As the days passed, I continued to process everything that had happened. The conversations with my daughter-in-law were slow, but steady. She made an effort, and I could see it. She wasn't the same person who had told me to leave. There was something different about her now. But I knew that change couldn't be measured by words alone. Time would tell. As I spent more time reflecting on everything, I realized how far I had come. There was a sense of peace within me that hadn't been there before. I didn't feel the weight of my past decisions hanging over me, and I certainly didn't feel like I had to prove myself to anyone. I had learned that my worth wasn't tied to the approval of others, not even family. I had built my own strength piece by piece in the wake of the pain. It was a slow and difficult process, but it was mine. It wasn't until a month later that my daughter-in-law invited me over for dinner. It wasn't a grand gesture. but it felt like an important one. She was trying and I appreciated that. When I arrived, I was surprised by how much she had put into making the evening special. The table was set beautifully, and there was a warmth in the air that hadn't been there before. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I was willing to see where things would go. We spoke and it wasn't easy. There were moments of awkward silence, but there was also genuine conversation. We talked about the past, about what had happened, and about where we both stood now. I wasn't ready to forgive completely, but I could feel myself softening. There were still scars, but I could see that she was trying to make amends. That night, I realized that forgiveness wasn't a one-time decision. It wasn't something that could be rushed. It was a journey, and I was taking it one step at a time. I didn't have to forget the past, but I didn't have to let it rule my life either. I wasn't sure if things would ever go back to the way they were, but I knew that I had the power to move forward. And that was enough. For the first time in months, I felt like I was in control of my own life again. And that was more than I could have ever hoped for.